What we want to do now is really to say, well, what's coming down the track? What should we be looking at? What's going on? What's Trump about? There's a lot of moving parts. And here's some of the key headings. And it's the same sort of idea, really. We're going to look at some Bible passages and line up some video content to say, hey, this is how it looks like it is lining up. So, the first thing to say is that even though we've been talking about the initial inner ring war that comes around Israel, and clearly that's been happening, I don't think it's the end of the story. So for those who've been reading the Weekly World Watch, I've been saying, yeah, there's been this ceasefire, hasn't there? But I've been saying it's probably not going to last because there's still the pricking briars, as Ezekiel calls it, need to be removed. And they haven't completely been removed at this point, so more than likely it's going to continue. I mean, if you listen to Benjamin Netanyahu, it's what he says. You know, Hamas will be destroyed. They cannot and will not ever rule Gaza from here on in. And he's never diverted from that, deviated from that, and nor is Trump. Trump totally backs that. That says to me there's definitely more trouble. And when we look at some passages in the scriptures in this regard, there's, in my view, very clear passages that say that this is going to happen. So in Zephaniah 2 verse 4, it says that Gaza will be abandoned, Ashkelon left in ruins, at midday Ashdod will be emptied and Ekron uprooted. Woe to you who live by the sea, you Kerethite people. The word of the Lord is against you, Canaan, the land of the Philistines. He says, I will destroy you, and none will be left. So that says to me, I mean, you know, we could maybe debate how much of it, does it mean there's not a single solitary person left? You know, we could take it super literally, but that says to me, you know, there's something even worse perhaps coming upon Gaza. There's another passage in Amos chapter 1 that says something quite sort of similar. So in Amos 1 verse 6 it says, this is what the Lord says, for 3 sins of Gaza, even for 4, I will not relent. Now look at this, because she, Gaza, took captive whole communities and sold them to Edom, I will send fire on the walls of Gaza. That's pretty astonishing, really, isn't it? On October the 7th, what did the people of Gaza do? They actually went and took captive whole communities. They took 250 people into captivity, of which at the moment there's around about, I think there's 59 still there. You know, there's been these releases, hasn't there? We'll talk more about the hostages in a minute, because I think even the hostage situation and what's going to happen is prophesied in the Bible. But that, to me, is quite an amazing verse, would you think? Gaza took captive whole communities, and here we are. That has most definitely happened. But God says he's going to send fire on the walls of Gaza. Well, you know, we could play video after video of the horrors of what's come on Gaza, of literal fire coming on literally the walls of so many places in this area. But bearing in mind, of course, that this little area in orange that's called Philistia there was always, in ancient Israel times, the thorn in its side, wasn't it? Right the way through its ancient history. It's amazing, really, that Israel's back on the scene, created in 1948, and lo and behold, it's the same setup as ancient Israel. There's if any of you, is it on Netflix, or there's a new series, a new sort of not animated thing. It's a series called The House of David. It's really, I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's really quite good, but it's showing, it's not cartoon, it's real people, and is acting out the whole story of David pretty accurately, it seems to me, against the scriptures. It's worth, you know, maybe watching it. But there's Goliath. You know, he comes from this area. He was a Philistine in the area of Philistia, and there was a literal thorn in the side, wasn't it, for Israel? And it's still there right now. But we're being told that fire is coming on them and they're going to get removed. It's mentioned again in Joel chapter 3. So in Joel chapter 3, if you want to have a look at Joel in some detail, one of the troubles of doing a talk like this is that I'm ding, ding, ding all over the place. And sometimes it's good just to say, let's just look at one chapter and just deal with that. So if you're interested in Joel, and especially Joel chapter 3, which is so amazing, there's a YouTube video I've done just on Joel that goes through all 3 chapters. So I can't really do it justice right now. But in saying that, here's some key points. So Joel chapter 3 is telling you and me about the lead up to Armageddon. That's what Joel chapter 3 is telling us. And amazingly, look what it says here in Joel chapter 3 verse 4. In the lead up to Armageddon, it says, "Yea, what have you got to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon, and all the coasts of Palestine? Will you render me a recompense? And if you recompense me, swiftly and speedily will I return your recompense upon your own head." So in the lead up to Armageddon, God says, what have you got to do with me, Tyre and Zidon? By the way, where is Tyre and Zidon? On which nation would I go to? Lebanon. Which of Israel's enemies are based in Tyre and Zidon? Hezbollah. On the news pretty much every day. In fact, Israel's hit Lebanon again today, haven't they? So that war is about to start all over again. So basically, you could decode that first line as, what have you got to do with me, Hezbollah? Because God is singling out Tyre and Zidon, which happen to be the main bases of Hezbollah. Then he says, and all the coasts of Palestine. Where's the coast of Palestine? It is what we would now call the Gaza Strip, the area of Philistia. So you could decode that whole first line as, what if God's saying, what have you got to do with me, Hezbollah, and what have you got to do with me, Hamas? And in the NIV, it says, are you repaying me for something I have done? If you're paying me back, I will swiftly and speedily return on your own heads what you have done. Do you think that there has been a recompense back to Hamas and Hezbollah because of what they've done? Certainly started. And there could well be more. Now, it doesn't end there, because in Joel chapter 3 verse 8, look what God says is going to happen to these specific people that he's already told us about. So I'm telling you about Hezbollah, I'm telling you about Hamas. Then he says in verse 8, I will sell... Hold on, we've got something... As people come in, the box pops up, it will disappear now, hopefully. I will sell your sons and your daughters into the hand of the children of Judah, and they shall sell them to the Sabeans, to a people far off, for the Lord has spoken it. Now, this is pretty astounding when you stop and think about it, because what God is saying is, I'm going to recompense you, and it's going to be swift and speedy, and I'm going to hand your sons and your daughters, in other words, the people that surround you, Hamas and Hezbollah, I'm going to sell them to the children of Judah, i.e. the people of Israel, and they in turn are going to sell them to the Sabeans. In other words, these people are going to be sold off. A price is going to be given, and they're going to be exported out of the area that they currently live in to whoever the Sabeans are. So I go and look at this. This is interesting, isn't it? So I think, well, where's the Sabeans? Is that a good question? Well, go in Wikipedia if you like Wikipedia, or go anywhere you like. Type in Sabeans. Who are the Sabeans? The Sabeans, it says, were an ancient people. They were a group down in South Arabia. They founded the kingdom of Sabar in modern-day Yemen. So God is saying, and when you look at the area of the Sabeans, it's really South Saudi Arabia, all the way down into the very southern bit of the of that sort of Gulf area of Yemen itself. So God is saying that these people are going to get sold and exported, right? Look, it says they're going to be sold to people far, far away. So, well, let's see if this video works. Let's have a listen to this.
Palestinian groups and tonight the Arab League have accused President Trump of advocating ethnic cleansing after he proposed relocating most of Gaza's residents to neighbouring Arab countries. It comes as Israel is continuing to prevent thousands of Palestinians from returning home to northern Gaza because Israel says Hamas has violated the ceasefire agreement by not providing information about the remaining hostages. Well, the US president earlier described Gaza as literally a demolition site and said neighbouring Jordan and Egypt should take people in from the territory, saying that would clean it out.
That's pretty amazing, isn't it? It really is pretty amazing. So if you're asking me what comes next, I think this is going to happen. Trump comes out with a lot of things that people say, well, it's just, noise. But actually, I actually do think he says what he means. And he tends to do what he says. So when he says this, and we'll hear him in a minute talking even more explicitly about what's going to happen. Now, I'm going to play you next a video that you might have seen because it sort of went viral. But Trump, this is an AI vision of what Gaza is going to look like. And I'm not saying Trump produced this video, but he put it on his own, he's got his own social media account. So he says, I found this video, I'm posting it out. Have a look at this video. It's called Trump Gaza.
Donald's coming to set you free, bringing the light for all to see. No more tunnels, no more fear. Trump Gaza is finally here. Trump Gaza shining bright, golden future, a brand new life. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza #1. Trump Gaza shining bright, golden future, a brand new life. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza #1.
It's pretty amazing, really, isn't it? So what he has definitely said is that America is going to take over Gaza. We're going to own it. People say, how are you going to do that? We're just going to do it. We're going to own Gaza. All those annoying, he didn't say this, but all those people that are getting in the way, all these Palestinians, they don't want to live there. They're not going to live there. They're going to be exported. We're going to make it a Riviera. But isn't it amazing that he's posted this video as a promotional video almost of what the dream is? But I couldn't help but notice this giant gold statue that the AI video has created that clearly he wants everybody to have a good look at. And doesn't it make you think of Daniel chapter 4? Daniel chapter 3? When Nebuchadnezzar built a giant gold statue of himself. It's pretty amazing. Right, so now come and have a look at Genesis chapter 14, because I think history is repeating itself. And Genesis 14 is one of these, what I call allegory. I don't call it. I mean, it's an allegory. In the Bible, there are many allegories. An allegory is, in scriptural terms, real life playing out with real people living their lives. It just so happens that they're acting out something in the future. You know, like when Abraham and Isaac, and Abraham was asked to go and sacrifice his son. Was that really Abraham really doing that with a real son and God providing a real ram in the thicket? Of course it was. But was it actually a greater story being played out about Jesus and his sacrifice and God providing? Of course it was. Was Joseph, when he was thrown in the pit and sold into slavery into Egypt, was all of that story of Joseph an enormous allegory about the whole life of Christ? Of course it was. I think this is another allegory in Genesis chapter 14 that's dealing with what's exactly happening right now. So in Genesis chapter 14, verse 14, I'll just read you a few verses. It says, when Abraham heard that his brother was taken captive, so we've got this captive situation going on, hostage situation, he armed his trained servants born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and he smote them and pursued them to Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. And he brought back all of the goods, and brought back again his brother Lot and his goods, and the women also, and the people. So the hostages were brought back. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Kedorlaomer, and I'll tell you who that is in just a second, and of the kings that were with him, at the valley of Shaveh, which is the king's dale. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him, and he blessed and said, "Blessed be Abraham of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth," and so on. Now, here is the events that we've just read about. You've got to read the whole chapter to get under the skin of this. But basically, this is, if you read Genesis 14, what's going on. First of all, Abraham's brother, his family, are taken captive, and they're taken captive by an Elamite king. Now I can ask you this time, where's Elam?
Syria.
No, Iran, southwest Iran. So this is a Iranian king here in Genesis chapter 14. How amazing is that? He's an Elamite king, southwest Iran he came from. So there's an Elamite king called Kedorlaomer, and this Elamite king, if you read the whole of Genesis 14, has got many allies with him, many other kings that are with him. But he's the power that's making all this trouble for the Jewish people, well, for Abraham, an Israelite. Abraham and his army, having seen that his family has been taken captive, decides to bring the hostages back and defeat the Elamite king's armies. And Abraham, as we've just read, pursued him all the way through Damascus to a place called Hobah, which is just north of Damascus. Abraham manages, with 318 of his men, to rescue all of the hostages and to defeat the Elamite king's armies. Then what happens is Melchizedek comes on the scene. This is a super significant person, isn't it? Who is Melchizedek a type of? Christ. Are we pretty certain on that? Any debate on that? No, because Hebrews tells us that Melchizedek is a type of Christ, and in fact, Jesus Christ himself is the ultimate king and high priest, and but of the same order of Melchizedek, yeah? So we've now got Melchizedek meeting Abraham. I've missed one out. The king of Sodom meets Abraham to make peace. So after all this war, there's a local king that says we better sort of make amends here and sort things out, and that there's a peace agreement sort of made. But the peace agreement actually is made on Abraham's terms, not on the king of Sodom's terms. So it's not an equal agreement. When you read it, Abraham's in control of the outcome. So even though it's an agreement, it's Abraham calling the shots. Melchizedek then meets Abraham at Salem. By the way, where's Salem? Jerusalem. Anybody know what Salem means? Peace. Jerusalem means city of peace. This is the first mention of Jerusalem in the whole of the Bible. And it's there. And Melchizedek meets Abraham at Jerusalem, basically. And he shares bread and wine with him. Now, what I'm suggesting to you is that this is an allegory, and really what we're seeing here, when Melchizedek meets Abraham at Salem, this is a future picture of Abraham actually meeting Christ himself, not just Melchizedek, who is only a type of Christ. Do we think Abraham will meet Christ in the kingdom? Do you think that Abraham will be part of the final service of breaking of bread with Christ in Jerusalem in the future? It's going to happen, isn't it? So in other words, what all of this event in Genesis 14, it's all leading up to the return of Christ and Abraham actually physically meeting Christ and sharing bread and wine. Where? In Jerusalem. But I therefore think that these other events, line by line, are the very events that lead up to this incredible event of Abraham finally seeing his Lord and Master, the Lord Jesus Christ himself. Because, look, in all allegories, they're never 100% perfect. Joseph thrown into a pit or thrown into prison for, it's not exactly like Jesus being nailed to the cross, is it? But it's similar. So you can't, some people have emailed me on this saying, well, it's not absolutely identical. And it isn't absolutely identical, but the theme is there. As with all allegories, the theme is there. So anyway, we've got people being taken captive. We've got Jews from October the 7th being taken captive, being taken hostage. Headed up by who? We've already seen who it's headed up by. The power behind Hamas and the power behind Hezbollah is Iran. The power behind this captive and hostage situation was an Elamite Iranian king called Kedorlaomer. Abraham and his army defeat the Elamite king's armies that are round about. We're told that in Genesis 14. Today we've had the IDF defeating, and it's still, as we've just said, an ongoing process, but defeating Iran's armies. Abraham pursues him through Damascus. And I think, we'll look at this in a second, one of the next things to come on our screens is war between Israel and Syria. And I'll show you why that's going to happen, both in terms of scriptures and in terms of events that are happening right now. But ultimately, look what happens. Abraham rescues his family who are captive. And slowly but surely, the hostage numbers are coming down and down and down due to immense pressure on Hamas. There's 59. When I last gave this talk, there was 102. So every time I stand up, the numbers are coming down. And then Israel pushes back, they release them up. So slowly but surely, this is happening. What then happens is the king of Sodom, this local king, meets Abraham to make peace, but it's on Israel's terms. And I think we will see that. Ultimately, in amongst all the horror that's still to come in terms of conflict, there will be some type of peace agreement between Israel and the surrounding people to allow them to live in sort of peace and safety. But it's temporary, because what's going to happen during the peace and safety bit? Sudden destruction. And who's going to come down into this void of peace and safety, or so-called peace and safety? Russia. And I'll show you that Ezekiel 38 tells you exactly that. So, yeah, to me, this is quite an amazing thing. And in fact, I don't know if you've seen this before, but I stumbled across this by reading some rabbi's work, and he had identified this, and the more I looked into it, I thought, yeah, I totally agree. This looks like this holds a lot of water to me, hence me showing it to you. So what have we got here? Ezekiel 28. We've sort of quoted this before. It says in verse 24 there shall be no more a pricking briar unto the house of Israel, nor any grieving thorn of all those, look at this little phrase, that are round about them. Where did we see that little phrase, round about? Which book and chapter was that in? No? No? It's the very first chapter we looked at. It's Zechariah 12. It says all the people round about. All the people round about. Israel's going to burn up all the people round about. Here it is. It's exactly the same word buried in Ezekiel 38. Israel is going to remove the pricking briars. And they pretty much are like pricking briars, aren't they? They're launching these aggravating rockets. Rarely do they kill people, although they do, of course. But they're firing this aggravate. It's like a pricking thorn in the side, isn't it? They can't destroy them. It doesn't say the axe, does it, that's going to lop Israel down. They're pricking briars. And all of them are going to be removed, those who are round about. Have a listen to this.
The ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza is officially over. Overnight, Israel carried out extensive strikes on Hamas targets, and the IDF is deploying and readying to take strong action against Hamas. Israel says the return to war is in response to the failed ceasefire talks and Hamas's refusal to release more hostages. and was done in full coordination with the White House. We have ILTV's Shosh Bedrosian standing by on the Gaza border with all the details. But first, let's take a look at the dramatic developments.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz have instructed the IDF to take strong action against the Hamas terrorist organization in the Gaza Strip, officially ending the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Overnight, the IDF struck multiple targets throughout the Strip in an operation dubbed Strength and Sword. The operation, which was conducted in cooperation with the Trump administration, targeted mainly mid-level Hamas commanders. The IDF says it now stands ready to expand the fighting, and on Tuesday issued evacuation warnings to Palestinians residing along the border, calling on them to evacuate dangerous combat zones, including in the towns of Beit Hanun and Khan Yunis. According to a statement put out by the Prime Minister's office in the early hours of Tuesday morning, the return to fighting follows Hamas's repeated refusal to release the hostages.
All this is happening this week, right? That was on Monday this week. And as we know today, the war has now escalated across into to Lebanon. You're on standby with the phone, aren't you, in case anything happens? So Andy said he's going to keep looking at the thing. Now, let me just fill in another piece of the puzzle, because there's a glaring omission, right, at the moment in Psalm 83, because what we've looked at so far is the fact that there's these people that are round about that say, let's cut off Israel and so on. And really, I put on the map, if you remember, well, let's put that, you don't have to remember, let's put it up there. Here we go. The map is about to come through. So all those places or tribes or peoples that are round about Israel are there in red. But do you notice that there's three of them in particular, Ammon, Moab and Edom, that are all over the current country that we now know as Jordan? Now this is quite interesting, because at the moment there's no sign, is there, you might think, of Jordan being part of this war. Also Assyria, or Assur, is mentioned, which partly also covers modern day Syria, and at the moment there isn't like the same level of war between Israel and Syria. So in this inner ring war, as I call it, some of it's underway, but not all of it's underway, would you think? Because Jordan isn't fighting Israel right now, and nor is Syria. But if Psalm 83 is right, and if Psalm 83 is happening as I think it is, then I would suggest that the war between Israel and Gaza and Hezbollah will continue, and ultimately it's going to suck in these other nations still. It's still to happen. And you might say to yourself, how on earth is Jordan going to get involved? Well, have a look at this. You know, we looked at Zephaniah chapter 2 a bit earlier on, and this is where it says Gaza is going to be destroyed, right? That's what Zephaniah 2 said. But in the verse, we read this earlier, didn't we? In Zephaniah chapter 2 and verse 8, let's see if we can find Zephaniah so you can see where it fits. It takes me ages to find Zephaniah. I wish I hadn't said I'm going to do it now. Right, let's have a race to see if we can find Zephaniah. It doesn't open like the other books. It's annoying. Hold on a minute. Oh, I found it. In Zephaniah 2, in verse 4, this is where it's telling you Gaza should be forsaken and so on. And you've got this great big destruction coming on Gaza. So we're still in this same chapter. And now in the same chapter, it says in verse 8, I have heard the reproach of Moab and the revilings of the children of Ammon. They have reproached my people and magnified themselves against their border. So we've got trouble happening with Gaza and destruction on Gaza. Same chapter then moves to Moab and Ammon. The very same place is mentioned in Psalm 83. And do you think God has got a problem with Moab and Jordan? Answer yes. Why? Because they've magnified themselves against the border. Jordan borders Israel, surprisingly, along the Jordan River, doesn't it? By the way, what is Jordan's connection with Israel right now? It's got a very, very significant connection with Israel, and especially Jerusalem. Exactly. They are the custodians of the Temple Mount itself. It's really under pseudo-Jordanian control. Even though Israel says we control it, they allow the Jordanians. So the Jordanians have day-to-day custodianship over the most holy site in the whole of Israel. We would all say it is, wouldn't we? Because that's where the temple was and will be. The future temple when Jesus comes back. But you notice they're magnifying themselves against the border. Now, I'm going to play you a clip now from Donald Trump, who is talking about Jordan. And have a listen to what he has to say about Jordan.
Egypt's president and the King of Jordan have both said that they won't take in displaced people from Gaza like you suggested. Is there anything you can do to make them do that? I mean, tariffs against those countries, for example?
They will do it. They will do it.
What makes you say that?
They're going to do it. Okay? We do a lot for them, and they're going to do it.
Palestinians from Gaza.
Yeah, I would like to see Jordan. I'd like to see Egypt take some look. The Gaza thing has not worked. It's never worked. And I feel very differently about Gaza than a lot of people. I think they should get a good, fresh, beautiful piece of land, and we get some people to put up the money to build it and make it nice and make it habitable and enjoyable and make it a home.
They don't want to leave, though. Palestinians say they don't want to leave.
I don't know how they could want to stay. It's a demolition site. It's a pure demolition site. If we could find the right piece of land or numerous pieces of land and build them some really nice places with plenty of money in the area, that's for sure, I think that would be a lot better than going back to Gaza, which has had just decades and decades of death.
Where would those pieces of land be?
Well, they could be in Jordan, and they could be in Egypt, and they could be in other places. You could have more than two, more than one, but you could have more than two. And you'd have people living in a place that could be very beautiful and safe and nice. Gaza's been a disaster for decades.
Would the U.S. pay for that?
I don't think the UN would pay, but I think there's plenty of people that would in the area. They have a lot of.
So here's the thing, right? So President Trump believes that some of these Palestinians that are currently in Gaza should go to Jordan. If you remember, do you remember the day when Trump had Zelensky over and there was the big ding-dong in the White House? The day after, King of Jordan goes in, who, by the way, has a Palestinian wife, just on the side. She puts a lot of stuff out there, massively supporting, as you can imagine, her being Palestinian, the Palestinians, very, very anti-Israel. So the King of Jordan is married to a Palestinian. But the King of Jordan goes in and sees Trump, and our whole conversation between Trump and the King of Jordan is, you are going to have to take Palestinians out of Gaza and house them in your country. But what then happened was, when the King of Jordan did not agree to this and flew back, then this is what happened.
Ayman Safadi, Jordan's foreign minister, warned that any attempt to displace Palestinians from the West Bank into Jordan would be taken as a declaration of war.
There was also talk about attempts to displace Palestinians to Jordan. His Majesty the King was clear when he said that this is a red line, and we are also clear. We have said previously, and we confirm again, that any attempt to displace Palestinians from the West Bank towards Jordan will be viewed as a declaration of war, and we will deal with it accordingly.
So could this be how Jordan gets sucked into this conflict? Is Trump going to back down? Or is Jordan going to back down? Something's going to happen to bring Jordan in. In fact, in recent days have been not excursions, that's probably the wrong word. Is it the right? Incursions. Thank you, Richard. Incursions. I'm glad we've got somebody intelligent in the room that can correct my language. Incursions out of Jordan into Israel, which aren't really that massively reported at the minute because they're small. But it's building up because the street, they call it the street in Jordan, are almost 100% in supportive of the Palestinian cause. It's really only the king at the top that's trying to stay allied in with the West. But you can imagine the enormous pressure that's building in that country. There's quite a lot of reports, if you look at it, that military analysts are saying Jordan's on the brink of massive upheaval and war and conflict, and it's all to do with this issue over Israel versus Gaza and so on. Which brings me on to Isaiah chapter 17, which talks about the other element of Psalm 83, which is Asher, which is partly to do with Syria. And in Isaiah chapter 17, do you remember I said about the sequence of worldwide nightmares that starts in Isaiah 13 and finishes in Isaiah 24? Remember that? There's Isaiah 17. It's in this sequence of events. And here we have the burden of Damascus, the capital city of Syria. In fact, I've done a talk on just Damascus, right, on YouTube. You might have a look at it because it's really, really interesting to look at this. Because I didn't realise this, but Damascus is in the Guinness Book of Records. Anybody know what it's in the Guinness Book of Records for? Not the oldest city. That isn't what it's in the Guinness Book of Records for.
Oldest permanently inhabited city.
That's an exact quote from Wikipedia, but it's not what it's in the Guinness Book of Records for. Shall I tell you what it's in the Guinness Book of Records for? As the oldest capital city in the world. There is no capital city older than Damascus. Now this sort of makes this place quite interesting because it's only about 40 miles away from Jerusalem, which is going to be the future capital city of the world. So the oldest capital city in the world is just a few miles away from the future capital city of the world. And I believe that is why this has got to happen, because if you think about it, Jerusalem's got to rise up and become the great capital city of the entire planet. Damascus, the original capital city of the entire world, is going to therefore fail and reach some demise, which is what this is saying. The burden of Damascus, behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, it shall be a ruinous heap. Even though there's been destruction in Damascus, it's still there, and it's still the capital city. It's going to completely fail. And also, the cities of Arua will be forsaken as well. Anybody know, if you wanted to go to those places, where would you need to go to the cities of Arua? Jordan. You'd have to go to Jordan, because that's where they are. So at the same time that Damascus fails, the cities in Jordan are also forsaken. And actually, when you keep reading it, you actually find that Israel has been in conflict during this time, and northern Israel is actually weakened during this conflict that's going to happen between Israel and Syria. That's why it says in the last verse there that the glory of Jacob shall be made thin at this time. Israel does not escape the conflict with Israel unscathed. Now, there's been big events, has there not, in Syria? Overnight, Assad and his regime gone. Anybody expecting that? Nobody expecting it. No world leaders saying, oh, this was on the agenda for years, months. No. Literally, we woke up, he's gone. Where did he go to? Went to Russia. So he goes to Russia, and the reason that he fled was because an offshoot of ISIS called HTS just overtook city after city and just piled into Damascus, and Assad had to flee. The trouble is, for Assad, it all came undone because part of the force that allowed him to stay in power was Iranian-backed Hezbollah forces in Syria. But they have all been diverted into Lebanon to go and help out in the war between Israel and Lebanon, right? So now there's a huge amount of fighting force that's been moved away from protecting Assad. Russia, meanwhile, has got all its focus, hasn't it? Laser focus on Ukraine. Also hasn't got the energy and ability to start a second front helping Assad to stay in power. So the time was up. There was nobody left to defend him. So he made a run for it. Now, with Assad gone, this new ISIS power has come into play, but there's a lot of Western governments saying, well, hopefully everything's going to be very good in Syria. Everybody's going to start getting on. There's hopefully no more problems. But Syria is a melting pot of nightmare fighting different factions. If you looked on a map of Syria, it's faction after faction. It's a multicoloured mishmash of mess. And did you hear Syria on the news the other day that they've massacred about 3,000 people because there was a group that were pushing back against the government? Syria, there's a lot more to happen, but have a look at this.
Israel's military says it's been carrying out airstrikes in southern Syria and outside the capital, Damascus. The strikes reportedly hit command centers and military bases containing weapons. That's according to the Israeli military. At least one person was killed. Hours before the attack, Syria condemned Israel's invasion of a buffer zone between Israel and Syria, calling for it to withdraw its forces. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his troops will remain in the occupied Golan Heights, quote, indefinitely.
So that was about 4 weeks ago. Just have a look at this graphic, this little video that explains what's happening.
In late 2024, the geopolitical situation in the Middle East changed dramatically as an unexpected rebel offensive toppled Syria's long-reigning ruler, Bashar al-Assad, in a matter of 11 days. While this was going on, neighboring Israel started its largest bombing campaign in Syria to date, with hundreds of airstrikes destroying over 80% of strategic military assets left by the Assad government. Israel's military also took over the UN buffer zone, which separated Syrian forces from the disputed and Israeli-controlled Golan Heights, and soon after they moved even further into Syrian territory, occupying strategic positions along the Yarmouk River and around Mount Hermon, which put them less than 20 kilometers away from the outskirts of Syria's capital, Damascus.
Mount Hermon's interesting, because Mount Hermon that they've just captured, and they said we're not moving off this mountain, was the very top line of where Israel's original kingdom finished. So Israel now has taken back the final little bit of territory that it once had when it was originally given as a piece of land, real estate by God to the people. So I think that's quite a significant move. They want to stay on this mountain because it looks straight down into Damascus, and it's quite easy to lob things in and also just control the area. And they're going to stay there. Now, the next bit, this is like a big puzzle, isn't it? Are you doing all right, by the way? Are we still all right? We now come back into this verse here because there's a deep, deep connection between Russia and Syria. And I want to try and show you that now. It isn't a coincidence that Assad has gone flying off to Russia. It isn't a coincidence that Russia has poured loads of its army and bases in to support Assad for a decade or more. It isn't a coincidence that Russia's got a naval base in Syria. There's a real huge link between Russia and Syria, and it's all detailed out in Daniel chapter 11. We haven't got time to do all of Daniel chapter 11 because there's a lot of verses, but here is just a few bits and pieces. So Daniel 11 verse 40, as we've already looked about, talks about the king of the north coming against the king of the south like a whirlwind with chariots and horsemen and many ships, and he enters into the countries and will overflow and pass over, and he's going to enter into the glorious land, which is where? Israel. Many countries will be overthrown. These, he doesn't invade. He doesn't invade Edom and Moab and the children of Ammon. That's Jordan. He's not interested in attacking Jordan. He's going straight in to Israel, and we find actually he goes on into Egypt. He does this after he has been pushed, because you notice there, as we've already looked at, the king of the south, which is basically America, Britain, English-speaking peoples based in Saudi Arabia. We'll look a bit more at that in a second in Ezekiel 38. But there's this push by the king of the south at this Gog, this Russian leader. Now, what I want to show you is that Putin's direction of travel is to come down into Israel. He is going to go through, he's going to come straight through Syria, straight into Israel. Now, I don't know how much you've looked at this next bit before, but this is really, really fascinating. So in Daniel chapter 11, when it talks about Gog coming down, it's all the same prophecy as Daniel chapter 8. Now, if you have a good look at Daniel chapter 8, what Daniel chapter 8 is talking about is the original king of the north. Now, can anybody tell me who was the original king of the north? Who was the ancient king of the north? Antiochus is a very good and what rate? Who said that, by the way? Antiochus is perfect answer, right? So I'm going to ask you another question. See if you get this right. So do you know he was part of a particular nation? He was part of an actual, a sort of an empire, actually. Do you know the people that he came from? No. He was part of the Seleucid Empire. Do you know where the Seleucid Empire came from? The Seleucid Empire came out of you know when Alexander the Great, he was the leader of which empire? The Greek Empire, right? So you've got Alexander the Great. He's got the Greek Empire, the Grecian Empire, the bronze bit of Neb's image, yeah. So there's this guy, Alexander the Great. He dies at age 33, and his kingdom gets split between 4 generals. One of the generals was called Seleucus, who was based in Syria. And this became the Seleucid Empire. And in the Seleucid Empire, there was this guy that came along called Antiochus Epiphanes, who was detailed out in Daniel chapter 8. Because it was Antiochus Epiphanes, and I'm going to show you some stuff about this guy, because he's not a nice guy. And God spends about 6 verses in Daniel 8 describing the antics of Antiochus Epiphanes. Why do you think God had a lot to say about Antiochus Epiphanes? Why has God got a lot to say about anybody as an individual? What's this person probably doing that's sort of meaning that I'm going to tell you a lot about him? It's because he's fighting against Israel. And he did. So what I'm saying to you is, Daniel chapter 8 and the early verses of Daniel chapter 8, it's all about Antiochus Epiphanes. This northern king of the north, based in Syria, who caused a major, major problem for Israel. And in the last days, there's another Antiochus Epiphanes going to come on the scene, a new king of the north. This guy is a fierce-looking king, we're told, a master of intrigue. This is all, by the way, happening at the time of the end. He'll become very strong, but not by his own power. This latter-day Antiochus Epiphanes, this new king of the north, causes astounding devastation and succeeds in whatever he does. He's going to destroy those who are mighty, the holy people. He's going to cause deceit to prosper, full of corruption, and he will consider himself superior. And when they feel secure, he will destroy many. I think the AV says through peace, he will destroy many people. And eventually he takes his stand against the Prince of Princes, Jesus, yet he will be destroyed, yet not by human power. This is a guy that lives at the time of the end. And this is a latter-day Antiochus Epiphanes. But I want to show you in a couple of minutes a video by a rabbi explaining what Antiochus Epiphanes did. Are you interested in this guy? Have a look at this.
Jewish people. Antiochus gained his position through bribery and flattery. He made notable conquests in the south, Egypt, the east, Persia, Parthia, Armenia, and the beautiful land, meaning Judah. His persecution of the Jewish people started after Antiochus was humiliated in Egypt by Rome. In 168 BC, Antiochus led an attack on Egypt and also sent a fleet to capture Cyprus. Before he reached Alexandria, his path was blocked by a single elderly Roman ambassador named Gaius Pompilius Livius, who delivered a message from the Roman Senate directing Antiochus to withdraw his armies from Egypt and Cyprus, or consider himself in a state of war with the Roman Republic. Antiochus said he would discuss it with his council, whereupon the Roman envoy drew a line in the sand around Antiochus and said, "Before you leave this circle, give me a reply that I can take back to the Roman Senate." This implied Rome would declare war if the king stepped out of the cycle without committing to leave Egypt immediately. Weighing his options, Antiochus decided to withdraw. Only then the Pompilius agreed to shake hands with Antiochus. The furious Syrian king returned to Judah and poured out his anger at the Jewish people, who did not want to undergo Hellenization. In the book of Maccabees, we read that Antiochus plundered the temple in Jerusalem and committed deeds of murder. We read 80,000 men, women, boys, girls, and even infants were murdered by Antiochus' soldiers that attacked Jerusalem. In December 167 BC, Antiochus committed his crowning act of blasphemy against the Jewish religion by erecting an altar to Zeus in the temple and sacrificed a swine on it. Antiochus went so far as to claim that he is God and insisted that the Jews refrain from following the Jewish religious laws, like diet, circumcision, Shabbats, and feasts. He made war with Jewish people and their God. Eventually, the Jewish people did rebel and
So here's the story. Ancient Antiochus Epiphanes tries to annex some land in Egypt. The Roman forces came in, drew a circle around him and said, "You're not going to do it. If you do, we will all launch our forces against you," because the Roman army at that point, the empire was growing and they were super strong. So Antiochus was backed into a corner and was forced to retreat. But he was absolutely full of indignation and rage. So as he left, he goes back to Syria, but goes through Israel and decides to take all his anger and rage out on Israel and all the things that we've just seen. Now, there's this this is Rabbi Paul Steinberg, who's written about Antiochus Epiphanes, and he's called it Antiochus the Madman. And basically, people called him Antiochus Epimanes. They sort of had a play on his name because Epimanes means you're bonkers, basically. So he had a nickname back in ancient times that he was mad. And as you see here, he's saying the same thing, that basically Antiochus Epiphanes tried to annex and conquer Egypt, but the Romans were advancing eastward and expanding, and they didn't allow him to annex Egypt. So Rome warned Antiochus not to expand his kingdom, and Antiochus wasn't powerful enough to push back at the might of the Roman Empire. So then, as I've said, Antiochus, furious, then returns to Jerusalem, slaughters thousands of people and outlaws Judaism. What I'm putting to you is that the exact same thing is playing out right now, because the latter-day king of the north isn't Antiochus Epiphanes, he's dead. It is Putin, who is the latter-day king of the north. What Putin has done is tried to annex out some land, has he not? Not Egypt this time, it's Ukraine. So he's gone in to try and take Ukraine. And what we're going to see is exactly the same thing is happening, that the might of the Western power of Europe, which is exactly the same as what it was in ancient times, it was called the Roman Empire then, now it's called Europe, they're all gathering steam And as I'm going to show you, they're about to draw a circle around Putin and force his hand into a deal that pushes him not completely out of Ukraine, but forces a stalemate situation and stop him in his tracks. What Putin will then do is exactly what Antiochus did, which is then take out all of his anger and indignation of being forced into this position by going straight down into Israel. It's history repeating itself. You know, this Antiochus was called a madman. Antiochus Epiphanes was called a madman.
The stakes in Ukraine could not be higher, with the Russian military making direct attacks on civilian targets like apartment buildings. And given Vladimir Putin's apparent willingness to escalate, Russian experts are now speculating about his mental state.
Has Putin gone crazy? Is he losing his grip on his sanity?
Evaluating Vladimir Putin's state of mind a top priority now.
The Russian leader could be completely off his rocker.
Some people say he has cancer, and some people say he has brain fog from COVID.
Even in Russia, citizens are buzzing. The Russian people may be starting to think Putin is insane.
Antiochus Epiphanes is playing out again. There is Antiochus Epiphanes. That's what he looked like. This is what the modern day Antiochus Epiphanes happens to look like. I mean, it's pretty uncanny, really, that God has put in power somebody that even looks like the original Antiochus Epiphanes, and all of this history is playing out before our very eyes. It is all repeating. Now, have a quick look at this, because what I'm saying to you is that I think the power of Europe coming together is essentially going to draw a line around Putin and stop his further advance. I actually think it's exactly the same thing that's playing out. Have a look at this video.
World leaders gathering in London to show support for Ukraine after that dramatic meeting in the Oval Office. President Zelensky joined NATO and EU representatives. The British Prime Minister calling this a once-in-a-generation moment for the region. Zelensky later meeting with King Charles. ABC's foreign correspondent Tom Sophie-Burge is in London.
Tonight, European leaders alongside Ukrainian President Zelensky gathering in London for a high-stakes emergency summit on Ukraine.
Can you patch things up with Donald Trump?
The US notably absent following Zelensky's fiery Oval Office meeting with President Trump and Vice President Vance Friday.
You're gambling with World War III.
The UK and France front and centre, agreeing to negotiate a peace proposal that would include the deployment of troops and planes to Ukraine to police a potential ceasefire.
See, if this does happen, right, and they all met a few days ago again to spec this out, if this does happen, it massively changes everything, because as soon as there are French troops and British troops and planes and our own people on the ground, that changes everything. Now, Putin's going to do all he can to say, if you do that, we're going to raise the ante again. But it puts enormous pressure on him. It's the same as that Roman general drawing a circle around Antiochus Epiphanes, saying, you're not going to come any further. And really, that's where we're getting to at this point. Really, what it looks like is this. There's Putin, there's Ukraine, there's the EU nations, and I think they're going to do this. They're literally going to box him in. You might not think that's likely, but I do think it's likely. And I think it's this that causes this. The king of the north will want to seek revenge for his humiliation. In fact, in Daniel chapter 11, verse 36, it says he will be full of indignation. And the word means rage. What does he actually think? Well, we actually find out exactly what Gog thinks, because in Ezekiel 38, it says that the Russian ruler, who is currently Putin, will think an evil thought. And he's going to say, I'm going to go up to the land of unwalled villages to take a spoil and a prey. And we find out in Ezekiel 38 that the very place he's going to go and take his revenge out on is Israel. Down he comes. By the way, of course, to take a spoil, I remember growing up at Shirley meeting and listening to talks and where people said, oh, Russia's going to come down one day. Maybe one day Israel might find oil. Maybe that's what Russia wants to come down and take. And then just a few years ago, this happened.
Amid a raging war between Russia and Ukraine, the European Union is now turning towards Israel for its natural gas supply needs, as the bloc claims that it has been blackmailed by Moscow for its gas supplies after siding with Kyiv. The European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen is in Jerusalem to strengthen Union's energy cooperation with Israel, as Russia has cut down energy supplies to several European nations amid heavy sanctions imposed by the EU to curb Moscow's Ukrainian invasion. The bloc has been looking for alternative suppliers to reduce its dependence on Russia, which in turn would help them in imposing stricter sanctions on Moscow.
The European Union was the biggest, most important client from the supplier Russia, oil, gas and coal. But with the beginning of this war and the attempt of Russia to blackmail us through energy by deliberately cutting the energy supplies, we decided to cut off and to get rid of the dependency of Russian fossil fuels and to move away from Russia and diversify to trustworthy suppliers. So it is for us very important, and I'm very grateful that we are now discussing this fascinating project that you are willing to increase the deliveries of gas to the European Union via Egypt. And tomorrow we will already take a very important step with the signing of a trilateral memorandum of understanding between Israel, the European Union and Egypt.
Russia has
That's pretty amazing, don't you think? So Israel's found enormous, in fact, the largest finds of gas in the whole world in recent times. So when it was found, there was no other greater find in recent decades than Israel has got over there in the eastern Mediterranean. What do you think Putin thinks to this as an idea? So Europe cuts off gas. Europe then goes to Israel and pipes it out through Egypt and ships out into Europe. Do you think Putin goes, well, it doesn't matter? Quite happy with that. I've lost my supply. Israel's now replacing my supply back into Europe. Do you think he thinks that's a great idea? And the answer is he thinks it's a very, very bad idea. And what do you think he thinks to Israel doing that? Does he say, well, it doesn't matter, I like Israel, they're fine taking all, because he sees it that it's his gas that they are taking from him because they're supplying it to his partner, Europe, who want nothing to do with him. So it's really interesting that that's happened. And what Russia is going to do is get together a conglomeration of nations to cause the greatest conflagration over Israel that we've ever seen. And there's Magog, Meshech, Tubal at the top. There's Togarmah and Gomer. There's Persia and Iran. There's Libya. There's Ethiopia, which is really more Sudan. And all of that lot are coming down. Now, there could be a few European stragglers involved, but I think this is predominantly what I've put on the screen here. I don't really think Europe gets involved in this war. This, by the way, is Armageddon. I think the European conflict that does come against Israel is after Jesus is back and in Jerusalem. The reason I say that is that in Revelation 17, the 10 kings that give their power and strength to the beast for 1 hour, which is all to do with Europe, right? They make war against the Lamb and those who are with him, who are called and chosen and faithful. Therefore, the war of the European war is a war against Israel, but when Christ is in place in Israel, not before. This is before Jesus is there. Jesus is coming back at any point. But what is Russia coming down for? Spoil. Now, Russia comes down after there has been the inner ring war and after there has been some sort of temporary peace that Israel has made in this area. But Russia's so enraged about what the deal is with Ukraine and how they've been encircled there, he literally comes down. You might say he hasn't managed to go more than 40 miles into Ukraine. How does Russia come all the way down into Israel? I mean, how is he going to do that? And the answer is simple. Because he hasn't got to invade Turkey because Turkey is allied to Russia. He hasn't got to invade he hasn't got to invade Syria because Syria is destroyed at that point. Damascus is gone. And anyway, Syria is on side with Russia fundamentally anyway. There's nothing in between Russia and Israel. He can just go straight through. There's no European force pushing back at him here. He just goes straight the way through, and he will come quickly. He comes like a tornado when he comes. Now, just to show you that I think this is right, in Ezekiel 38, hopefully this will catch up. There we go. This is Ezekiel 38, verse 8. A long time from now, you, Gog, and this huge conglomeration, outer circle of nations will be called into action. In the distant future, you will swoop down on the land of Israel. Now, this is it, look, which will be enjoying peace after recovering from war. Well. Israel's enjoying peace after recovering from war. I wonder which war Israel's recovering from when Russia comes down. It's the inner ring war that we're seeing happening on our screens right now. Still got to develop, still reach a peace agreement. But this is when Russia comes down. This is not an inner ring war. This is an outer circle war. Last couple of, I've just noticed the time. I'm really sorry about this. I've got 2 minutes. Have we got 2 minutes, or should we wrap up? What do you think? Are you sure? Time it, Richard, because I can see you go, come on. Ezekiel 38 talks about the king of the south power. It's got Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and all the young lions. In other words, Russia comes down with all those nations I've just put on the screen, but there's an opposing force that says, well, excuse me, what are you doing? And they are Sheba and Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and all the young lions. And they say, have you come to take a spoil? And have you gathered this great company army to take a prey? Are you going to carry away silver and gold? So the question is, who is the opposing force? Sheba and Dedan, that is Saudi Arabia and the Gulf Arab states like the UAE and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, as I've just said. Tarshish is Britain, and the young lions are basically offspring of this country, so Canada, America, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. And you might say, well, why are they classed as the king of the south power in Daniel chapter 11? And it's because Saudi Arabia, first on the list, is south of Israel, is it not? And we, Britain and America especially, have got many, many bases in Saudi Arabia. By the way, why do you think we've got lots of bases and military hardware in Saudi Arabia? Why would Britain and America bother doing that? Oil. Saudi Arabia is the largest producer of oil in the world. And it goes straight past Iran, through the Persian Gulf, out through the Straits of Hormuz. And so these powers made a decision a long, long time ago to base a lot of military hardware in Saudi Arabia to protect the flow of oil. 15% of all the world's oil flows straight out of Saudi Arabia through the Persian Gulf past Iran. That's why they've done it. But here's what I think we're going to see. If this guy is still on the throne when all this happens, which he might be, Trump himself is, as part of the young lions, is going to ask that very question, have you come to take a spoil? You can almost hear him saying it, because what is Trump all about is about money and deals and nothing to do with ideology. All he's going to think of is this what it's about? Have you come to take energy and cash? Is this why you've betrayed me? I thought we were friends. I thought we were on side. What are you doing? Can we stop them? No, we can't stop them. Russia comes down. The might of America cannot stop them. So there is this map of Sheba and Dedan, and there they are. And that's where we're based as well. And let me just play you very quickly this little video.
2. In 2020, 2 more countries, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, joined the club by signing the Abraham Accords. Morocco and Sudan followed suit, again changing the map and tempting some to high hopes.
Because this peace will eventually expand to include other Arab states, and ultimately it can end the Arab-Israeli conflict once and for all.
Embassies opened, direct flights to and from Israel were established. In 2022, almost 1 million passengers flew between the United Arab Emirates and Tel Aviv. Trade increased between the two countries. So, economic benefits and the promise to have the US as an ally, the deal seemed to work for all parties involved. And that sparked the interest of another big player, seen by many as the leader of the Muslim world. In the last couple of years, Saudi and Israeli politicians tightened connections.
Israeli media is reporting that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made a secret visit to Saudi Arabia.
Then ministers visited also in public. Another agreement on the horizon, again brokered by the US. For the US, that would be a capstone to the Abraham Accords. For Israel, another milestone towards a new Middle East, but no Palestinian territories on this map.
So, to conclude, right, with this little story, what we're seeing is Russia getting all of its allies together. At the same time, the King of the South is getting its allies together, working with the Gulf Arab states, working with Saudi Arabia, and America bringing it all together. In fact, did I lose track of days and times? Was it yesterday or today, where Trump says, actually, I'm up for joining the UK's Commonwealth. I'm happy to be an associate member. America says we're happy to be an associate member of the Commonwealth because I love King Charles. That's what he tweeted this morning, or whatever. I love King Charles. That's what he put. And all you're watching is the King of the South coming together, just exactly the same as we're seeing everything else come together from a Russian perspective. So I'm skipping a couple of videos here. This is the last slide. So look, here we go. There's so many prophecies, aren't there, that are coming down the track, many of them. And really what we're seeing is the progress rapidly escalating. We said, didn't we, at the beginning, this is a big jigsaw puzzle, but the contractions have started. The contractions are underway. They're not going to stop. It's going to conclude with Jesus coming back. When does Jesus come back in amongst all of this story? I think it's sooner rather than later. I don't think it's after it can't be when Russia's come into Israel, because Jesus stands on the Mount of Olives and it says that he comes with the saints. So when he actually comes into Jerusalem, when Gog is there and Russia's there with all these other nations, judgment's already happened. So when in the scheme of it does Jesus actually come back? Well, I actually think it's some point around Damascus being destroyed. Because the last time Jesus was ever seen, by the way, was when Saul was near Damascus. Do you remember that? And he saw a bright light in heaven. He saw a bright light in heaven. It says he was near Damascus. And the preaching to the Gentiles began at that point, because he told Paul to go and preach to the Gentiles. And so the clock to the preaching to the Gentiles started at Damascus. And I think it will come to an end at Damascus. When Damascus fails, another bright light will appear in heaven. And this time, it's not Jesus blinding everyone. It's Jesus appearing in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And we're going to see that happen. And it could be sooner rather than later.